The tarmac at Denver International Airport stretched endlessly under the harsh Colorado sun, mirroring the endless months Captain Derek Wolfe had spent in the mountains of Afghanistan. At 38, Derek carried himself with the disciplined posture of a career military man, broad shoulders squared, steel gray eyes that missed nothing, and hands that had learned to be steady under the worst circumstances. His service record was impeccable. 2 tours in Iraq, 3 in Afghanistan, decorated for valor, and respected by every soldier who'd served under him. The bus carrying returning soldiers pulled up to the terminal, and Derek felt something he hadn't experienced in 18 months. Nervousness. It wasn't the tactical awareness that kept him alive in combat zones, but the flutter of a man about to reunite with the family he'd carried in his heart through every firefight, every sleepless night on watch, every moment when danger felt closer than his next breath. His wife Monica had been his anchor since they'd met 12 years ago at a military charity fundraiser in Colorado Springs. She was working as an event coordinator then, her auburn hair catching the light as she moved efficiently through the crowd, her green eyes bright with intelligence and warmth. Derek had been a young lieutenant fresh from his first deployment, and Monica had seemed like everything good about the world he was fighting to protect. Their daughter Lily, now 16, had been 4 when Derek first deployed. She used to run to the door whenever she heard his truck in the driveway, shrieking, "Daddy!" with pure joy. Their son, Mason, 14, had inherited Derek's analytical mind, but Monica's gentler nature, or so Derek had believed. As Derek walked through the terminal, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, he spotted them near the arrivals gate. Monica stood with her arms crossed, her face carefully neutral. She'd lost weight, he noticed, and there was something different about her posture. Less welcoming, more defensive. Lily and Mason flanked her, both staring at their phones rather than watching for him. "Hey," Derek said as he approached, setting down his bag and opening his arms for the embrace he'd dreamed about for months. Monica stepped forward, but the hug was brief, perfunctory. "Welcome home," she said, her voice lacking the warmth he remembered. "Dad," Lily acknowledged with a quick glance up from her phone, but she made no move toward him. Mason at least looked up and nodded. "Hey, Dad." The drive home to their house in Monument was quiet, except for Derek's attempts at conversation. He asked about school, about their friends, about the changes he'd noticed in town during his brief glimpses out the window, hoping to reconnect with the life he had left behind. The responses were monosyllabic, distracted. Their house sat on 2 acres of pine-studded land, a place Derek had bought with the dream of giving his family space to grow, privacy, and a slice of the American dream he'd sworn to defend. Now, as they pulled into the driveway, it felt more like a fortress with walls he couldn't breach. That evening, Derek tried to re-establish routines. He'd always been the disciplinarian in the family, not harsh, but consistent. Structure and discipline had served him well in the military and had created a stable home environment before his deployment. "Lily, dinner's ready. Put the phone away," Derek said as they sat down to Monica's lasagna. "I'm texting my friend about homework," Lily replied without looking up. "That can wait 30 minutes. Mom doesn't make me put it away." Derek looked at Monica, expecting support, but she just shrugged. "It's not worth the fight, Derek. Things have been different while you were gone." During dinner, Derek tried to share stories from his deployment, carefully edited ones about the Afghan people he'd worked with, the progress they'd made, the small victories that kept soldiers motivated. But his family seemed more interested in their own conversations, talking around him rather than with him. After dinner, Derek suggested a family movie night, another old tradition. "I have plans with friends," Lily said immediately. "On a school night?" Derek asked. "God, Dad, you're so strict. I'm 16, not 6. And I'm your father, not your buddy. You can see your friends on Friday." The explosion that followed caught Derek off guard. Lily's face flushed red as she stood up from the table. "This is exactly why we were happier when you were gone. You come back and immediately start ordering everyone around like we're your soldiers." Derek felt the words hit him like a physical blow, but his expression remained controlled. "Lily, that's enough." "No, it's not enough," she was shouting now. "Mom, tell him." Monica's voice was calm, deadly calm. "Derek, maybe we should talk." But before Derek could respond, Mason chimed in. His voice was quieter, but somehow more cutting. "Dad, you're too strict. We like it better when you're gone. Everything was easier, more relaxed. We could just be a normal family." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Derek looked at his son, the boy he'd taught to throw a football, whose homework he'd helped with over video calls from half a world away, whose picture he'd carried in his helmet, and saw a stranger. Monica stood up slowly. "Kids, go upstairs. Your father and I need to talk." When they were alone, Monica turned to face him, and Derek saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, but cold resolution. "The kids are happier without you around," she said, her voice steady and matter-of-fact. "Maybe you should find your own place." Derek had faced enemy fire, improvised explosive devices, and mortar attacks with less shock than he felt in that moment. He studied his wife's face, looking for some sign of the woman he'd married, the woman whose picture he'd carried through 18 months of hardship. "I see," he said finally, his voice as controlled as it had been during his worst combat situations. "Understood." Monica seemed surprised by his calm response, as if she'd expected him to argue, to plead, to fight for his family. But Derek had learned long ago that when a situation was beyond salvage, the smartest move was strategic withdrawal and reassessment. He walked to the kitchen, picked up his phone, and dialed a number he'd hoped never to use. "Richardson Law Firm. This is the answering service. This is Derek Wolf. I need to speak with Tom Richardson. Tell him it's urgent." While he waited for the call back, Derek stood at the kitchen window looking out at the property he'd bought, the home he'd built, the life he'd fought to protect. In Afghanistan, the enemy was usually obvious. They shot at you. Here, the enemy wore familiar faces and spoke with voices he'd loved. His phone rang. "Derek, Jesus, what time is it? Are you okay?" Tom Richardson had been Derek's college roommate at the Air Force Academy before Derek transferred to the Army, and Tom had left military service for law school. They'd stayed in touch over the years, and Tom had handled Derek's will and power of attorney before his deployments. "Tom, I need a divorce attorney. The best, you know." "Derek, slow down. What happened? Are you back stateside?" "I got back today. My wife just told me to find my own place. My kids told me they were happier without me." There was a long pause. Tom Richardson was one of the few people who knew Derek well enough to understand what those words meant, coming from a man who never showed weakness. "Derek, I'm sorry, but are you sure you want to jump straight to—" Derek's voice carried the authority of a man who'd commanded soldiers in combat. "I need the name of the best divorce attorney in Colorado Springs, someone who understands military assets, deployment benefits, and child custody, and I need it tonight." Another pause. "Her name is Patricia Vance. She's expensive, she's determined, and she doesn't lose. I'll text you her emergency contact number." "Thanks, Tom." "Derek, be careful. Don't do anything you'll regret." Derek almost smiled at that. Regret was a luxury he'd learned to live without. I won't regret anything, Tom, but they might. After hanging up, Derek called Patricia Vance's emergency line. Within 20 minutes, he had an appointment for first thing in the morning. Then he went upstairs, packed a single bag with enough clothes for a few days, and returned to the kitchen where Monica was cleaning up dinner. I'll be at the base tomorrow handling some paperwork, he said. After that, I'll be staying at a hotel until I can find a place. Monica turned around, and for just a moment, he saw surprise flicker across her face. Maybe she'd expected him to fight for his family, to beg, to make promises about changing. Derek, maybe we can work through this. The adjustment period is always hard. After deployment, Derek looked at his wife, really looked at her, and noticed things his emotional shock had missed earlier. She was wearing a new perfume, something lighter and more expensive than what she usually chose. Her nails were perfectly manicured, something she'd rarely bothered with during their marriage. There was a glow about her that spoke of someone who'd been living life on her own terms. No, he said simply. We can't. He picked up his bag and walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Monica, when this is over, you're going to wish you'd handled this differently, but it'll be too late then. Is that a threat? Derek's smile was cold, the same expression that had made enemy combatants step back during interrogations. No, it's a promise. He walked out into the Colorado night, threw his bag in his truck, and drove toward town. Behind him, the house he'd called home was lit up like a beacon, warm and welcoming. But that warmth wasn't for him anymore. Derek had learned something important in the military. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. His family had just shown him exactly where he stood in their priorities. Now it was time to show them where they stood in his. The Marriott in Colorado Springs wasn't much to look at, but it was clean, quiet, and most importantly, it wasn't home. Derek checked in using his military credit card, one Monica had never had access to, and settled into a room that smelled of industrial cleaning supplies and other people's temporary lives. At 0600 hours, Derek was showered, dressed in his Class B uniform, and sitting in Patricia Vance's office. The attorney was younger than he'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp features and eyes that evaluated everything like a battlefield commander assessing terrain. Captain Wolf, I've reviewed the basic information Tom Richardson sent over. 12 years of marriage, 2 children, significant military benefits, and what appears to be irreconcilable differences. She set down a legal pad covered in precise handwriting. But I get the feeling there's more to this story. Derek had spent the sleepless night thinking, analyzing the situation like a military operation. I think my wife is having an affair. What makes you think that? Derek outlined his observations from the previous evening. Monica's changed appearance, her defensive posture, the perfume, the manicured nails, and most telling, her complete lack of surprise when the children said they preferred life without him. It felt rehearsed, Derek said, like they'd practiced their responses. Patricia made notes. Any idea who? Not yet, but I intend to find out. Captain, I need to be clear about something. If you're planning any kind of surveillance or investigation that could be construed as stalking or harassment, I understand the legal boundaries, Derek interrupted. I also understand that knowledge is power, and right now, I don't have enough intelligence to make informed decisions. Patricia studied him for a long moment. You're not going to be one of those clients who falls apart emotionally, are you? No, ma'am. I'm going to be the client who wins. After leaving the attorney's office, Derek drove to Fort Carson. He needed to report back from deployment, handle his reassignment paperwork, and, more importantly, he needed access to resources that weren't available to civilians. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres had served under Derek in Afghanistan. He was now stationed at Fort Carson in intelligence support, and he owed Derek his life after a particularly bad engagement outside Kandahar. "Captain Wolf." Torres stood and saluted as Derek entered his office. "Sir, I heard you were back. How was the homecoming?" "Complicated. Sergeant, I need a favor." Torres closed his office door. "Anything, sir." Derek explained his situation in clinical terms: the dissolution of his marriage, the need for information, and the importance of understanding what had happened during his deployment. "I need to know who my wife has been spending time with," Derek said. "Phone records, social media activity, credit card statements, anything that can give me a picture of the last 6 months." Torres was quiet for a moment. "Sir, that could be problematic if anyone found out." "Mike, do you remember that night outside Kandahar when we were pinned down and you took shrapnel in your leg?" "Yes, sir." "Do you remember what I told you when I carried you to the medevac?" Torres nodded slowly. "You said you never leave a man behind." "I kept that promise then. I'm asking you to keep one now." 3 hours later, Derek had more information than he'd expected. Monica's phone records showed extensive communication with someone named Brian Cooper over the past 8 months. Her credit card statements revealed charges at restaurants Derek had never heard of, a hotel in Denver, and several purchases from Victoria's Secret, all while Derek was sending his combat pay home to support his family. But the most damaging evidence came from social media. Monica's Facebook account, which she'd apparently forgotten was linked to Derek's email notifications, showed a pattern of posts about enjoying life and discovering who I really am, and photos from social events where she appeared to be with the same man. A tall, athletic-looking guy with designer clothes and an expensive smile. Brian Cooper turned out to be a real estate developer, divorced, with a reputation for pursuing married women. His Instagram account was a showcase of expensive cars, restaurant meals, and exotic trips. Derek found photos of Monica in several posts, though she was never tagged or named. That evening, Derek sat in his hotel room with a bottle of bourbon and a legal pad, planning his next moves like a military operation. He had confirmed his suspicions about Monica's affair, but he needed more intelligence before he could develop an effective strategy. His phone rang. Monica's number. "Derek, we need to talk." "I'm listening." "The kids feel bad about last night. Maybe you could come over for dinner tomorrow, and we could all discuss this like adults." Derek almost laughed. Monica was trying to control the narrative, probably hoping to manipulate him into a reconciliation that would make her feel less guilty about her affair. "What time?" he asked. "6 Mo. I'll make your favorite pot roast." "I'll be there." After hanging up, Derek made another call to Patricia Vance. "I need you to prepare divorce papers," he said. "Full custody of both children, division of all assets, including my military benefits, and I want her to understand that infidelity affects property distribution in Colorado." "Derek, slow down. You're talking about a scorched earth approach. Are you sure you want to?" "Patricia, I need you to understand something about me. I've spent my adult life in situations where showing mercy gets people hurt. When someone betrays you in combat, they don't get a second chance because that second chance might cost the lives of everyone depending on you. This isn't combat, Derek. Isn't it?" The next evening, Derek arrived at his former home carrying a bottle of wine and a manila envelope. Monica had gone all out: pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and fresh rolls. The kids were dressed nicely and appeared to be making an effort to be pleasant. "Dad, I'm sorry about last night," Lily said as they sat down to dinner. "I was just frustrated about other stuff, and I took it out on you." "Me too," Mason added. "I didn't mean what I said about liking it better when you're gone." Derek nodded and smiled. "I appreciate that. Family is important, and we should always be honest with each other." Monica beamed. "See, I told you we could work through this. Families have rough patches after deployments, but we always find our way back to each other." During dinner, Derek was charming, funny, and engaged. He told stories about Afghanistan that made the kids laugh, asked about their friends and school activities, and generally behaved like the husband and father Monica remembered. After dinner, Monica suggested they watch a movie together. "Just like old times," she said, curling up next to Derek on the couch. Derek waited until the kids were engrossed in the movie, then quietly excused himself to use the bathroom. Instead, he went to Monica's home office and plugged a small device into her computer, a gift from Sergeant Torres that would give him remote access to her email and files. With his mission set in motion, Derek returned to the living room, steeling himself for the battles that lay ahead. When the movie ended, Derek stood up and picked up the manila envelope he had brought. "Before I go, Monica, I have something for you." Monica's face lit up. "Derek, you didn't have to bring me a present." "Oh, but I did." Derek handed her the envelope. Monica opened it, and Derek watched the color drain from her face as she saw the divorce papers, along with printed copies of her text messages with Brian Cooper and several photos from social media. "Derek, I can explain." "Kids, come here," Derek said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded soldiers. Lily and Mason appeared from the family room, looking confused. Derek faced his family, the people he'd risked his life to protect, the reason he'd endured 18 months of hardship in Afghanistan, and made his final assessment. "Lily, Mason, I want you to understand something about choices and consequences. Your mother has been seeing another man while I was deployed. She's been using the money I sent home to pay for outings with her boyfriend, and she's been lying to all of us about who she really is." "Derek, stop," Monica said, panic creeping into her voice. "And you too," Derek continued, looking at his children. "Told me yesterday that you were happier without me, that I was too strict, that you liked it better when I was gone." "Dad, we didn't mean—" Lily started. "Yes, you did, and I believe you. So, I'm going to give all of you exactly what you want." Derek walked to the door, then turned back one final time. "Monica, you'll be served with divorce papers within the week. I'm requesting full custody of both children, but based on what they told me yesterday, I don't think they'll want to live with someone as strict as me. So, you can have them." "Derek, please, we can work this out," Monica said, tears starting to flow. Derek's expression didn't change. "Monica, you made your choice 8 months ago. I just didn't know about it until now. But here's what you didn't know about me. I never forgive betrayal. Ever. You can't just walk away from your children. I'm not walking away. I'm giving them what they said they wanted. A life without their strict father. Consider it my final gift to this family." Derek walked out into the night, leaving behind the sound of Monica's sobs and his children's confused protests. As he drove back to his hotel, Derek felt something he hadn't experienced since his first firefight in Iraq. Absolute clarity about what needed to be done. His family had made their choice. Now it was time to make his. Derek's hotel room had been transformed into a command center. Legal documents, Financial records, surveillance photos, and tactical notes covered every flat surface. On his laptop screen, Brian Cooper's social media posts painted a picture of a man who collected trophies, expensive toys, exotic trips, and other men's wives. Patricia Vance had called that morning with an update on the divorce proceedings, setting the next phase of Derek's campaign into motion. Monica's attorney wants to negotiate. They're claiming temporary insanity due to the stress of your deployment, asking for counseling instead of divorce. What did you tell them? That my client doesn't negotiate with terrorists? Derek almost smiled. He'd chosen his attorney well, but divorce was just the opening move in a larger strategy. Derek had spent sleepless nights analyzing the situation from every angle, identifying his objectives and the resources available to achieve them. This wasn't about winning a legal case. It was about total victory. His first stop that morning was the Colorado Springs Police Department. Detective Lisa Hartwell had worked with Derek on a joint task force 3 years earlier, investigating a military contractor who'd been selling weapons to insurgents. She was smart, thorough, and most importantly, she understood the difference between justice and revenge. "Derek Wolf," she said as he entered her office. "I heard you were back from deployment. How are you adjusting to civilian life?" "Learning new things every day. Lisa, I need some advice on a personal matter." Derek explained his situation, the affair, the divorce, and his suspicions that there might be more to Brian Cooper than expensive clothes and smooth talk. "You want me to run a background check on your wife's boyfriend?" Lisa asked. "I want to know if he's the kind of man who should be around my children. If Monica is going to have them most of the time, I need to know they're safe." Lisa studied Derek for a long moment. "And if he's not safe? Then I deal with it appropriately." 2 hours later, Derek had Brian Cooper's complete criminal history, financial records, and employment background. Cooper had 2 DUI convictions, a restraining order filed by his ex-wife for domestic trouble, later dropped, and a civil lawsuit from a business partner who claimed Cooper had stolen client lists and sabotaged his real estate deals. More interestingly, Cooper was heavily in debt despite his flashy lifestyle. His real estate business was failing, he owed back taxes, and his expensive car was 3 months behind on payments. He was the kind of man who needed someone to support his lifestyle, and Monica, with her access to Derek's military benefits and deployment pay, fit the profile perfectly. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Monica. "The kids want to see you. Can you come over tonight?" Instead of responding, Derek drove to his house and parked across the street. At 4:30, Lily and Mason got off the school bus and went inside. At 5:15, Brian Cooper's BMW pulled into Derek's driveway. Derek watched through binoculars as Cooper walked up to the front door with a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of wine. Monica answered the door in a red dress Derek had never seen before, something tight and expensive that screamed second chance at youth. They kissed on Derek's front porch before going inside. Derek made a phone call. "Sergeant Torres, I need another favor." "Yes, sir." "I need you to call Child Protective Services. Anonymous tip about a situation that might endanger the welfare of minors." Derek provided his home address and suggested they might want to investigate reports of alcohol abuse and domestic trouble involving a man who had unsupervised access to children. He mentioned Brian Cooper by name and suggested they run a background check. "Sir, are you sure about this, Mike? Those are my children in there with a man who has a history of violence against women. If something happened to them because I didn't act on intelligence I had, how would you feel?" "Understood, sir. I'll make the call." Derek's next stop was Brian Cooper's real estate office. The receptionist was a young blonde who looked starstruck when Derek introduced himself as a recently returned combat veteran interested in buying property. "Mr. Cooper is in a client meeting," she said, "but I can schedule you for tomorrow." "Actually, I was hoping to surprise my wife. She's been working with Brian, Monica Wolf. Maybe you could help me coordinate something romantic." The receptionist's face lit up. "Oh, Monica. She's so sweet. Mr. Cooper talks about her all the time. They make such a cute couple." Derek maintained his friendly expression while filing away that information. Even Cooper's employees knew about the affair. "When do they usually meet? I want to make sure I don't interfere with their business appointments." "Usually Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, and sometimes they have dinner meetings on weekends. Mr. Cooper says she's one of his most important clients." Derek thanked the receptionist and left, making a mental note to have Patricia subpoena Brian Cooper's business records. If Monica was using Derek's money to invest in real estate with her boyfriend, that was fraud. That evening, Derek received a call from Patricia Vance. "Derek, we have a problem. Child Protective Services showed up at your house tonight. Monica is furious, claiming you called them out of spite." "Did they find anything concerning?" "They found a man with a domestic violence history in the house with your children. They've opened an investigation." "Good." "Derek, this is playing with fire. If Monica can prove you made that call." "She can't prove anything. But if CPS determines that my children are in an unsafe environment, that affects custody arrangements, doesn't it?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. "You're thinking like a chess player, not a client going through a divorce." "I'm thinking like a father who won't let anyone hurt his children, even if those children don't want his protection." Derek's final stop that day was Brian Cooper's apartment complex, an upscale development that Cooper clearly couldn't afford. Derek had learned from his military intelligence training that the best way to understand an enemy was to know their weaknesses, their pressure points, and their escape routes. He needed to be prepared for whatever came next. Cooper's apartment was on the second floor, with a view of the parking lot and a balcony that faced west. Derek noted the security cameras, the entry points, and the neighboring units. He also noticed that Cooper's BMW was parked in a visitor spot rather than a reserved space, probably because he couldn't afford the extra rent for a designated parking spot. A plan was forming in Derek's mind, something more comprehensive than a simple divorce. Monica and Brian had made the mistake of believing that Derek was just a soldier, disciplined, honorable, and bound by rules. They didn't understand that he was also a warrior who'd learned that sometimes the only way to protect the innocent was to confront the guilty head-on. Derek drove back to his hotel and opened his laptop. He had one more piece of intelligence to gather before he could finalize his strategy. Monica's computer, thanks to the device Torres had provided, was an open book. Derek scrolled through 8 months of emails, photos, and documents that painted a picture of a woman who'd been planning her exit from their marriage long before Derek returned from deployment. But the most interesting discovery was a series of emails between Monica and Brian discussing their future plans. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning to take Derek for everything he was worth. Monica had been gathering information about Derek's military benefits, his deployment pay, and his veterans' disability compensation. Brian had been advising her on how to maximize her settlement and minimize Derek's parental rights. In one email, Brian had written, "Once we get him out of the picture completely, we can really start living. Military guys are all the same. They think honor and duty mean something, but money is what really matters. By the time he figures out what's happening, it'll be too late." Monica's response, The kids already prefer you over him anyway. Once the divorce is final, we can be a real family." Derek stared at the screen, feeling something cold and final settle in his chest. They weren't just betraying him. They were planning to erase him completely from the lives of his children. Derek closed the laptop and poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon. Tomorrow, he would set his plan in motion. But tonight, he allowed himself to grieve for the family he'd thought he had, the wife he'd thought he'd married, and the children who'd been turned against him by people who saw him as nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness. The grief lasted exactly 1 hour. After that, there was only the mission. Derek's phone rang at 500 hours. Patricia Vance's voice was crisp despite the early hour. "We have a situation. Monica's attorney is claiming harassment and asking for a restraining order. The CPS visit, the divorce papers, and what they're calling suspicious surveillance of their client." Derek was already dressed and reviewing his tactical notes for the day. "What kind of evidence do they have?" he asked. "Nothing concrete, but they're painting a picture of an unstable veteran who can't handle his wife moving on. Derek, we need to be careful here. If they can establish a pattern of harassment, they can't establish what doesn't exist. Monica made her choices, and now she's dealing with the consequences. That's not harassment, that's accountability." Derek ended the call and headed to Fort Carson. His reassignment meeting with Colonel Martinez was at 0800, but first, he had another appointment. Captain Rebecca Stone had served 2 tours with Derek in Iraq and was now stationed at Fort Carson in the Judge Advocate General's office. She was one of the smartest legal minds Derek had encountered in the military. And more importantly, she understood the warrior mindset. "Derek, congratulations on making it home safely," she said as he entered her office. "Though I hear the home front is more challenging than the combat zone. Rebecca, I need some advice on military regulations regarding financial support and family obligations." Derek explained his situation, carefully focusing on the legal aspects. If Monica was using his deployment pay and military benefits to fund an affair, there might be violations of military financial responsibility regulations. "Derek, what you're describing could potentially affect her access to military spousal benefits, especially if you can prove financial infidelity. But pursuing that kind of case would require evidence." "I understand." Captain Stone studied Derek's face. "What aren't you telling me?" Derek handed her a flash drive. "Text messages between my wife and her boyfriend discussing how to maximize their take from military benefits and minimize my parental rights. They're not just having an affair, they're running a con." Stone plugged in the flash drive and read through the files Derek had compiled. Her expression grew darker with each document. "Derek, this is conspiracy to commit fraud. They're planning to manipulate military benefits and family court proceedings for financial gain. What are my options? Officially, you report this to the appropriate authorities and let the system handle it." Stone looked directly at Derek. "Unofficially, you make sure they understand that actions have consequences." Derek left Fort Carson with more than legal advice. He now had official documentation that Monica's affair constituted financial fraud against the military, which would affect not only their divorce settlement, but potentially result in criminal charges. His next stop was Brian Cooper's real estate office. But this time, Derek wasn't playing the friendly potential client. He walked in wearing his dress uniform, every ribbon and medal visible, looking exactly like what he was. A decorated combat veteran with the bearing of someone who'd faced down enemies and won. "I'd like to speak with Brian Cooper," Derek told the receptionist. "Do you have an appointment?" Tell him Captain Derek Wolf is here to discuss his relationship with my wife. The receptionist's face went pale. Within minutes, Brian Cooper emerged from his office, and Derek got his first close look at the man who'd been staying in his home. Cooper was tall, athletic, with the kind of artificial confidence that came from expensive clothes and easy victories. But Derek noticed the micro-expressions, the slight widening of the eyes, the quick glance toward the exit, the unconscious step backward. Cooper recognized a predator when he saw one. "Captain Wolf," Cooper said, extending his hand. "I've heard so much about you." Derek ignored the handshake. "Have you? What exactly has my wife told you about me?" "Look, I think there's been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. I know exactly what you are and what you've been doing." Derek's voice carried the authority of a man who'd commanded soldiers in life or death situations. "I know about the text messages planning to defraud military benefits. I know about your trouble with the law, and I know you're broke." Cooper's artificial confidence cracked. "I don't know what you're talking about." Derek smiled, and Cooper took another step backward. "Brian, let me explain something to you. I've spent the last 18 months dealing with people who shoot at me for a living. You're a real estate developer who charms lonely wives. Do you understand the difference in our skill sets? Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. You see, you made a mistake when you chose my wife. You thought you were dealing with some deployed soldier who'd come home grateful for whatever scraps of family life you left him. But what you're actually dealing with is a man who's learned that sometimes the only way to protect what matters is to eliminate the threat completely." Derek leaned closer, and Cooper could see the cold calculation in his eyes. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to end your relationship with my wife. You're going to leave Colorado Springs, and you're going to disappear from our lives completely. And if I don't?" Derek's smile widened. "Then you'll discover just how creative a man can be when he has unlimited time, unlimited resources, and absolutely nothing left to lose." Derek turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Brian, you might want to check your credit report. I hear identity theft is a real problem these days." That afternoon, Derek received a call from Sergeant Torres. "Sir, you asked me to monitor certain social media accounts. Brian Cooper just posted that he's taking an extended business trip to Phoenix, leaving tonight." Derek felt a surge of satisfaction. One threat neutralized, but the war was far from over. His phone buzzed with a text from Monica. "We need to talk." "Brian told me you threatened him." Derek replied, "Home in 30 minutes." When Derek arrived at his house, Monica was waiting in the living room. Her face was a mixture of anger and fear. The kids were nowhere to be seen. "You can't intimidate people just because you don't like the situation," Monica said as soon as he walked in. "I didn't intimidate anyone. I had a conversation with a man who's been defrauding military benefits and planning to manipulate our children for financial gain." "That's not true." Derek pulled out printed copies of Monica's emails with Brian. "Then explain these." Monica's face went white as she read her own words, planning Derek's financial and parental destruction. "Derek, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You weren't just having an affair, Monica. You were planning to rob me blind and turn my children against me. And you were doing it with a man who has a history of domestic trouble. Brian would never hurt me or the kids. Like he never hurt his ex-wife? Like he never got arrested for DUI with someone's children in the car?" Derek's voice was deadly calm. "You were so busy playing house with your boyfriend that you put our children in danger." Monica started crying, but Derek felt nothing. The woman he'd loved was gone, replaced by someone who'd betrayed everything he'd fought to protect. "What do you want?" Monica asked through her tears. "I want you to understand that your choices have consequences. Brian Cooper is leaving town tonight because he realized that some fights aren't worth the risk. You should learn the same lesson. You can't destroy my life because you're angry." Derek stood up, and Monica instinctively moved backward. "Monica, I haven't even started yet. Brian was just the appetizer. You're the main course." As Derek walked toward the door, Monica called after him. "Derek, please. We can still work this out. The kids need their father and me. I made a mistake, but we can fix this." Derek turned back one last time. "Monica, you made your choice when you started planning to destroy me. Now you get to live with the consequences." That night, Derek sat in his hotel room, planning the next phase of his operation. Brian Cooper was gone, but he was just a symptom of the larger problem. Monica had shown her true nature, and she'd turned his children against him. Derek had always believed in proportional response, matched the level of aggression directed at you. But Monica hadn't just been aggressive. She'd been calculating, manipulative, and cruel. She'd used his love for his family as a weapon against him. Tomorrow, Derek would show Monica what real strategy looked like. Tonight, he allowed himself one final moment of regret for the family that had never really existed, and the marriage that had been a lie from the moment he deployed. Then he got back to work. The real war was just beginning. Monica's panicked voicemail was waiting when Derek woke up at 05:30. "Derek, please call me back. Something's wrong with my credit cards and the bank is asking questions about our joint accounts. We need to talk." Derek deleted the message without calling back. Phase 2 was proceeding exactly as planned. Patricia Vance had been busy executing Derek's instructions regarding their shared assets. Every joint account had been frozen pending divorce proceedings. Every credit card had been canceled, and Monica's access to Derek's military benefits had been suspended pending the fraud investigation. But Derek's strategy went deeper than just financial pressure. While Brian Cooper was driving toward Phoenix, Derek was implementing a comprehensive campaign designed to isolate Monica and demonstrate the real consequences of her choices. His first stop was Monument Elementary School, where he met with Principal Jennifer Walsh to discuss his children's educational needs during the divorce proceedings. "Captain Wolf, I'm so sorry to hear about your family situation," Principal Walsh said as they sat in her office. "Lily and Mason are good kids, but I have noticed some behavioral changes recently." "What kind of changes?" "Lily's grades have dropped significantly, and she's been defiant with teachers. Mason has become withdrawn and isn't participating in activities he used to enjoy. And frankly, some of the other parents have mentioned concerns about men they don't recognize picking up the children." Derek felt genuine anger for the first time since this began, not at Monica or Brian, but at himself for not protecting his children from the chaos his wife had created. "Principal Walsh, I need to make some changes to the authorized pickup list. Only my wife and I should be allowed to collect my children from school. If anyone else attempts pickup, I want to be notified immediately." "Of course, Captain Wolf. And if you need any documentation for custody proceedings regarding the children's academic performance or behavioral issues, that might be helpful." "Thank you." Derek's next stop was the financial advisor who'd been managing Monica's investment account, the one she'd been building using Derek's deployment pay. Robert Hayes was a family friend who'd known both Derek and Monica for years. "Derek, welcome home," Hayes said, but his expression was troubled. "I need to ask you some difficult questions about Monica's recent investment activities." "Such as?" She's been moving large amounts of money into high-risk investments without your knowledge or consent. Some of these investments were recommended by someone she described as her business partner, a Brian Cooper. Derek nodded grimly. How much are we talking about? Nearly $40,000 from your deployment pay. Plus, she liquidated your children's college funds. Derek, I tried to contact you, but she said you'd authorized everything and didn't want to be bothered with financial details while deployed. The college funds? Derek felt something cold and final settle in his chest. The realization of the full extent of Monica's betrayal transformed his resolve, sharpening his focus for what lay ahead. Monica hadn't just betrayed their marriage. She'd stolen their children's future to fund her affair. Robert, I need you to document everything. Every transaction, every conversation, every recommendation from Brian Cooper. This is going to be evidence in fraud proceedings. That afternoon, Derek received a call from Detective Hartwell. Derek, I have some interesting information about your friend Brian Cooper. We just got a report from Phoenix PD. Cooper was arrested last night for assault and drunk driving. Apparently, he got into a bar fight and then tried to drive back to his hotel. Interesting timing. Derek, where were you last night between 9 and 11 p.m.? In my hotel room on the phone with my attorney. Why? Because someone called Cooper's hotel and told him that his ex-wife was spreading rumors about him at a specific bar in Phoenix. Cooper went to confront her, found out she wasn't there, got drunk, started a fight with some locals who didn't appreciate his attitude, and ended up in jail. Derek was quiet for a moment. That's unfortunate for Mr. Cooper. Derek, did you make that call? Lisa, I was dealing with my divorce attorney and CPS interviews about my children's welfare. I don't have time to worry about what Brian Cooper does in Phoenix. Uh-huh. Well, Cooper's going to be in Arizona for a while. His bail hearing isn't until next week, and apparently he can't afford a lawyer. After hanging up, Derek allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Brian Cooper's removal from the equation was proceeding faster than expected, but Derek hadn't had to lift a finger. Sometimes the best strategy was simply giving your enemies enough rope to hang themselves. That evening, Derek drove to his house for what he told Monica would be a final conversation about their divorce settlement. Monica was waiting with a bottle of wine and what appeared to be a peace offering, Derek's favorite dinner, and an outfit he'd always found attractive. Derek, I'm so glad you're here, Monica said, moving toward him with the kind of smile that had once made his heart race. I've been thinking about everything, and I realize I made terrible mistakes. Derek sat down but didn't touch the wine. What kind of mistakes? The affair, obviously. I was lonely, confused, and Brian took advantage of that. But Derek, we can work through this. Couples survive infidelity all the time. Derek studied his wife's face. Even now, she was trying to manipulate him to make herself the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of betrayal. What about the money, Monica? What money? The $40,000 you invested with Brian, the college funds you liquidated, the credit cards you maxed out while I was dodging bullets to pay our bills. Monica's practiced smile faltered. I can explain all of that. I'm sure you can. But first, let me share some news with you. Brian Cooper was arrested in Phoenix last night. Assault and DUI. He's looking at serious jail time. And apparently, he can't afford a lawyer because he's broke. Monica's face went pale. That's impossible. Brian has money, investments. Brian has debt, liens, and a criminal record. The only reason he was able to maintain his lifestyle was by spending other people's money, specifically, our money. Derek leaned forward, and Monica instinctively moved backward. "Monica, here's what you need to understand. Brian Cooper was a con artist who targeted military wives during deployments. You weren't his girlfriend. You were his mark. And now you're broke, facing fraud charges, and your boyfriend is in jail in another state. Derek, please, we can fix this. I love you. I've always loved you. Brian was just a mistake, a moment of weakness." Derek stood up and Monica reached for his hand. "Don't," Derek said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded soldiers. "Don't touch me. Don't lie to me. And don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was a mistake. What do you want me to do? I want you to understand that your choices have consequences. You chose Brian Cooper over your family. You chose deception over honesty. You chose to turn our children against me. Now you get to live with those choices." Derek walked toward the door, then stopped. "Oh, and Monica. The kids asked me today why their college funds are gone. I told them to ask their mother." Lily cried for an hour. As Derek drove back to his hotel, his phone rang. Monica's number. "Derek, please don't do this. I'll do anything to make this right. Monica, you had 18 months to make this right. Instead, you chose to make it worse every single day. Now it's too late. You're going to destroy our family over one mistake." Derek felt something cold and final in his voice. "Monica, you destroyed this family the first time you brought another man into our home. I'm just making sure everyone understands what you really are." Derek hung up and turned off his phone. Tomorrow, Monica would discover that her isolation was just beginning. Derek had learned something important in Afghanistan. When you're fighting an enemy who shows no mercy, the only winning strategy is to be more ruthless than they are. Monica had shown him no mercy when she planned his destruction. Now he would show her what real warfare looked like. The bank manager, Mrs. Peterson, looked uncomfortable as she slid the documents across her desk to Monica. Derek watched through the security camera feed on his phone, another gift from Sergeant Torres, as his wife's face crumpled upon seeing her financial reality. "Mrs. Wolf, I'm sorry, but your accounts have been frozen by court order pending divorce proceedings. Additionally, there are fraud allegations being investigated by federal authorities regarding misuse of military benefits." Derek had spent the morning at the FBI field office in Colorado Springs, meeting with Agent Sarah Kim, who specialized in military benefit fraud. The next steps of his campaign were already set in motion. The evidence Derek had compiled, the emails, the financial transactions, the coordination between Monica and Brian, painted a clear picture of systematic fraud. "Captain Wolf, this is substantial evidence of conspiracy to defraud the federal government," Agent Kim had said. "We're talking about potential prison time, not just divorce court. Agent Kim, I want my children protected, and I want everyone to understand that military benefits aren't toys for people to play games with." Derek's phone buzzed. Monica was calling for the 15th time that morning. Instead of answering, Derek drove to the high school to meet with the guidance counselor about Lily's behavioral issues. What he learned made his blood run cold. "Captain Wolf, Lily has been telling other students that her father is psychologically damaged from combat and that her mother is protecting the family from him." Counselor Margaret Torres, no relation to Sergeant Torres, explained. "She's been describing you as unstable, potentially violent, and unable to adjust to civilian life." Derek felt the familiar cold rage that had kept him alive in combat zones. Where would she get those ideas? She says her mother and her mother's boyfriend have been explaining PTSD to her, helping her understand why soldiers sometimes become dangerous to their families. Derek realized that Monica and Brian hadn't just been planning financial fraud. They'd been conducting a psychological warfare campaign against his own children, poisoning them against him, using his military service as a weapon. "Mrs. Torres, I need you to document everything Lily has said about me. Every conversation, every claim, every story she's been told. Captain Wolf, is it possible that you're experiencing some readjustment issues? Combat veterans often—" Derek's expression stopped her mid-sentence. Mrs. Torres had just made the mistake of buying into the narrative Monica had been spreading. "Ma'am, I've been psychologically evaluated by military professionals every 6 months for the past 5 years. I've never shown signs of PTSD, domestic trouble, or any inability to adjust. What I'm showing signs of is a father who's discovering that his wife has been systematically harming his children." Harming? What would you call convincing children that their father is dangerous? What would you call stealing their college funds to pay for an affair? What would you call exposing them to a man with a history of domestic violence? Mrs. Torres looked shaken. I hadn't thought of it that way." That afternoon, Derek met with Patricia Vance to review their strategy for the custody hearing scheduled for the following week. "Derek, Monica's attorney is claiming that you're using your military training to intimidate and harass their client. They're painting you as an unstable veteran who can't handle rejection. What evidence do they have?" "Brian Cooper's statement about feeling threatened during your conversation at his office. You ruined him. No, Monica, you did that all on your own. You chose to believe his lies. You chose to betray our family. And now you're facing the consequences of those choices." Monica's face paled, and she looked like she might be sick. "Derek, please. You can't do this. You can't just destroy people's lives like this." "I'm not destroying anyone's life, Monica. I'm just making sure the truth comes out. And sometimes, the truth hurts." Derek stood up and leaned over the table, his voice low and dangerous. "You wanted to play games with my family, Monica. You wanted to use my military service against me. Well, now you're seeing what happens when you mess with a soldier." Monica's eyes filled with tears, but Derek felt no pity. She had brought this on herself, and now she would face the music. "You should have thought about the consequences before you started this war, Monica. Because now, it's too late to back down." Derek turned and walked away, leaving Monica alone with her thoughts and the reality of the situation she had created. As he drove back to his hotel, he knew that the final battle was approaching. The custody hearing was just days away, and he was determined to win, no matter what it took. "He ruined himself when he chose to target my family. I just made sure everyone knew about it." Derek stood up, and Monica looked up at him with something that might have been recognition. The realization that the man she'd married was far more formidable than she'd ever understood. "Derek, please. I know I made mistakes. But we can still—" "Monica, you made your choice. You chose a con artist over your husband. You chose deception over honesty. You chose to psychologically harm our children rather than deal with your guilt. Now you get to live with the consequences. What about Lily and Mason? They're innocent in all this." Derek's expression didn't change. "No, they're not. They told me they were happier without me, that they liked it better when I was gone. They chose their side in this war just like you did. Their children. They didn't understand what they were saying. They understood enough to hurt me deliberately. They understood enough to choose their mother over their deployed father. They understood enough to believe I was dangerous, rather than trust the man who'd protected them their entire lives." Derek walked toward the library exit, then turned back one final time. "Monica, you wanted to know what psychological warfare looks like? This is just the beginning. By the time I'm finished, everyone will know exactly what kind of woman you are, what kind of mother you are, and what kind of choices you made. And your children will have to live with the consequences of what their mother did for the rest of their lives." As Derek drove back to his hotel, he felt something he hadn't experienced since his first successful mission in Afghanistan: the satisfaction of a perfectly executed operation. Monica was isolated, Brian was neutralized, and the truth about their actions was spreading through every channel that mattered. Tomorrow, Derek would receive confirmation that the custody hearing had been moved up due to new evidence regarding child welfare concerns. Monica would discover that her psychological warfare campaign against Derek had backfired spectacularly. But Derek wasn't finished yet. The final phase would demonstrate to everyone involved that Derek Wolfe never forgot a betrayal and never forgave anyone who turned his own children against him. The courthouse in Colorado Springs was bustling with the usual parade of human drama, but courtroom 3B fell silent when Derek walked in, wearing his dress uniform, every medal and ribbon displayed with military precision. He'd learned long ago that perception was often more important than reality, and he wanted everyone present to understand exactly who they were dealing with. Monica sat at the plaintiff's table with her attorney, David Chun, looking haggard and desperate. She'd lost weight. Her clothes hung loosely, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting panic. Derek felt nothing looking at her, only the steady resolve of a man who had come prepared for victory. Not anger, not satisfaction, just the cold assessment of a mission objective. Patricia Vance had outdone herself in preparation. Their table was covered with documentation that would paint a picture of systematic fraud, child endangerment, and psychological abuse, each detail meticulously organized for maximum impact. But Derek's secret weapon wasn't found in any of those files. All rise for the Honorable Judge Rebecca Martinez. Judge Martinez was a veteran herself, having served as a JAG officer before transitioning to civilian courts. Derek had researched her background extensively. She had zero tolerance for fraud against military personnel and a particular hatred for anyone who endangered children. "This is a custody hearing in the matter of Wolfe versus Wolfe," Judge Martinez began. "I've reviewed the preliminary filings, and I have to say this is one of the most complex cases I've seen involving military families." Monica's attorney stood first. "Your Honor, my client is seeking primary custody of the minor children based on Captain Wolfe's inability to adjust to civilian life following his deployment. We have evidence of erratic behavior, intimidation tactics, and what appears to be a campaign of harassment against Mrs. Wolfe and her associates." Derek almost smiled. Monica's attorney was leading with the psychological warfare narrative, not realizing Derek had anticipated this exact strategy. Judge Martinez looked skeptical. "What kind of evidence, counselor?" "Testimony from the children themselves about their father's strict and controlling behavior, documentation of intimidating conduct toward Mrs. Wolfe's business associate, and a pattern of surveillance and harassment that began immediately upon Captain Wolfe's return from deployment." Patricia Vance stood up. "Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence that will provide crucial context for the court." "Proceed, counselor." Patricia began methodically dismantling Monica's narrative. She presented bank records showing Monica's fraudulent use of military benefits, email communications between Monica and Brian Cooper, planning Derek's financial destruction, and documentation of Brian Cooper's criminal history. "Your Honor, what Mr. Chun is characterizing as adjustment issues is actually a decorated combat veteran's appropriate response to discovering that his wife had been systematically misusing military benefits while conducting an affair with a man who has a history of domestic violence. Judge Martinez studied the documents. Mrs. Wolf, did you use your husband's deployment pay to fund personal investments without his knowledge or consent? Monica's attorney whispered urgently in her ear before she answered. Your Honor, I made some poor financial decisions during a difficult time, but... Mrs. Wolf, did you liquidate your children's college funds to invest in projects recommended by Brian Cooper? Monica's face crumpled. I thought they were good investments. I thought I was securing our future. Your Honor, Patricia continued, we'd also like to present testimony regarding the systematic psychological abuse of the minor children. Derek watched as Monica's face went pale. This was the moment he'd been building toward. Call your witness, counselor. We call Dr. Amanda Foster, child psychologist. Dr. Foster was a professional Derek had consulted after his meetings with the school counselor and principal. She'd interviewed both children extensively and had reached conclusions that would devastate Monica's custody case. Dr. Foster, in your professional opinion, have the Wolf children been subjected to psychological manipulation? Yes, absolutely. Both children have been systematically conditioned to fear and distrust their father using false information about combat trauma and military service. They've been told their father is potentially dangerous, psychologically damaged, and unable to properly care for them. Who provided this false information? According to the children, primarily their mother and her boyfriend, Brian Cooper. They described months of conversations designed to convince them that their father's military service made him unsuitable as a parent. Judge Martinez looked directly at Monica. Mrs. Wolf, did you tell your children that their father was psychologically damaged from combat service? Monica's attorney tried to object, but Judge Martinez cut him off. Mrs. Wolf, answer the question. Brian thought it would help them understand why Derek was so strict, so controlling. We weren't trying to hurt anyone. Mrs. Wolf, Captain Wolf's military psychological evaluations show no signs of combat trauma, PTSD, or adjustment disorders. Were you aware of this when you told your children he was dangerous? Monica started crying, but Derek felt nothing. She had made her choice to weaponize his military service against his own children. Your Honor, Patricia continued, we'd like to call our final witness. Derek stood up. Your Honor, I'd like to speak for myself. Judge Martinez nodded. Captain Wolf, you have the floor. Derek walked to the witness stand with the bearing of a man who'd testified before congressional committees about military operations. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of command. Your Honor, I served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. I've been shot at, mortared, and ambushed. I've lost friends to enemy action and watched good soldiers make the ultimate sacrifice to protect the freedoms we all enjoy. Derek looked directly at Monica. But nothing I experienced in combat prepared me for coming home to discover that my own family had declared war on me. My wife took from me, lied to me, and turned my children against me using my military service as a weapon. My children told me they were happier without me, that they preferred life when I was gone. Derek's voice remained calm, controlled, but everyone in the courtroom could feel the unwavering steel beneath it. I want the court to understand what that kind of betrayal does to a father, and to his children. Derek knelt so he was eye level with his children, his gaze steady but gentle. It means that for now, you're going to live with me. The court has decided that's what's best for your safety and well-being, until your mom can make things right. He looked from Lily to Mason, letting the weight of his words settle. But I don't want you to think this is about punishing you. It's about making sure you're protected, and about both of you learning that choices, even the ones we don't understand at first, have real consequences. Lily wiped tears from her eyes. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't know what to believe. I was just scared. Derek put a hand on her shoulder. I know, sweetheart. I know this wasn't easy for either of you. But from now on, I promise, I'll always be honest with you, and I'll always fight for what's right for our family. Mason looked up through watery eyes. Can we still see Mom? You will, Derek said, and though his voice was calm, it was firm. The judge says you can visit her, but there will be some rules to make sure you're safe and that things stay fair. Your mom is going to have to work through some things before you can stay with her the way you used to, but she's still your mother. That won't change. As they walked toward the parking lot together, for the first time since returning home, Derek felt a sense of resolve that was edged with hope. The war for his family had taken everything from him, but now, with the truth out and his children by his side, he was finally ready to rebuild. I made terrible mistakes, Monica said finally, her voice trembling. I thought I was protecting you in my own way, but I realize now how much I hurt all of us. I'm so sorry for what I did and for what I took from you both. Mason looked down at his hands, fidgeting with his pencil. I wish things hadn't ended up like this. Monica reached out, her eyes filled with tears. Me too, honey. I can't go back and fix everything, but I'm doing my best now. I hope you'll forgive me someday, but I understand if it takes time. Lily was quiet, staring at her mother for a long moment. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Mom, but maybe I will. I don't want to be angry forever. They sat together on the couch, the silence thick with all the words and apologies that years of hurt could not quite bridge. Monica hugged her children, this time gently, as if she understood how fragile trust could be. From his office, Derek watched the scene unfold, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. He had won custody, kept his children safe, and forced the truth into the light. But he knew some wounds would never fully heal. After Monica's visit ended, Lily and Mason quietly returned to their homework. Derek came out and checked on them, offering a nod and a gentle touch on each shoulder. He said nothing, but his presence was a silent promise. He would never fail them again. As the evening settled over the quiet ranch house, Derek looked at his family, damaged but surviving, scarred but stronger. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that, despite everything, there might still be hope for healing. Derek's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of his pain and the reality of his choices. The room was silent, except for the soft sound of Lily's tears. Mason's face flushed with a mix of anger and desperation. Dad, you can't just shut off your feelings for us. We made a mistake, but we're trying to fix it. We need you to forgive us. Derek's expression didn't change. Forgiveness is a luxury I can't afford. Not after what you did. Not after what your mother did. Lily wiped her tears, her voice steady despite the emotion. Dad, we're your children. We love you, and we want to be a family again. Please, give us a chance to make this right. Derek looked at his children, seeing the fear and hope in their eyes. He remembered the nights he'd spent in the desert, the battles he'd fought, and the friends he'd lost. He thought about the love he'd carried with him through every deployment, the love that had kept him going when all hope seemed lost. But he also remembered the betrayal, the lies, and the pain. He remembered the cold, hard truth that his family had turned against him, that they had chosen to believe the worst about him. "I can't," Derek said finally, his voice soft but firm. "I can't go back to being the father I was before. I can't trust that you won't turn against me again. I can't risk that kind of pain." Mason looked down, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "So, what are we supposed to do, Dad? Just live with a stranger?" Derek's heart ached, but he knew he had to be strong. He had to protect himself and his children from the kind of pain that could destroy them all. "You live with the consequences of your choices," Derek said. "You live with the knowledge that actions have repercussions, and that love, even between family, isn't always enough to heal the wounds of betrayal." Lily and Mason exchanged a glance, their eyes filled with a mix of sadness and understanding. They knew they had hurt their father deeply, and they knew that healing would take time, if it was even possible. Derek walked over to them, his voice gentle but resolute. "I will always be here for you. I will always provide for you and protect you. But I can't be the father I was before. Not after what happened. You have to understand that." The children nodded, their eyes downcast. They knew their father's words were final, and they knew that the road to redemption would be long and difficult. As Derek watched them, he felt a profound sense of loss. He had won the battle for his children, but he had lost the war for his heart. He had become a guardian, a protector, but he was no longer a father in the way he once was, and he didn't know if he could ever be again. The house functioned more like a command post than a home, the air heavy with unspoken words and unmet needs. Derek maintained structure and safety, but it was a sterile order, a garrisoned peace where tenderness never crossed the threshold. Lily made her own breakfast, handled her applications and financial aid forms for college, and rarely asked for advice. Mason took care of chores, spent his free time tinkering with robotics, and only spoke to his father when necessity dictated. No tempers flared, but no warmth rekindled either. The only voices that raised above a murmur came from distant memories, or in dreams Derek sometimes had of the family, as it once had been, laughing around the dinner table in the glow of a family truly whole. Sometimes Mason lingered in the doorway to the office late at night, an encrypted question in his eyes he could never quite phrase. Sometimes Lily would leave her coffee cup beside Derek's on the kitchen counter, almost as if hoping he'd ask about her day, but he always just rinsed it and set it in the rack. They learned to carry disappointment with the same quiet discipline Derek brought home from war. On the night before Lily's graduation, Derek stood at the edge of her doorway, watching her pack a suitcase for college. She looked up, and for a flicker, there was hope in her eyes. "Dad, are you going to come to the ceremony?" He nodded. "I'll be there." She hesitated, as if searching for something beyond words. "Will you be proud of me?" "I'm proud of your achievements." The reply was automatic, precise. Lily held his gaze for a moment longer. "That's not really what I meant." He knew. But there were some bridges even time and remorse couldn't mend, not when a heart had been trained for survival at all costs. He could only watch her turn back to her suitcase, finished in silence, and wish, just for a moment, that letting down his guard was as easy as letting go of the past. As the house settled into quiet, Derek stared out across the dark Colorado landscape, wondering silently if there would ever come a night when victory would finally feel like peace. "You've proven you can be disciplined, responsible, and trustworthy," Derek said, his tone steady. and you and Mason have rebuilt a lot of what was lost when you believed your mother's lies." He paused, studying Lily's face, the way she tried to keep her chin up, even as her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "But love, Lily," he went on gently, "that's not something that can just return because you ask for it, or work toward it like a grade or a prize. Love is trust, and when that was broken, it changed me." Lily's hands knotted in her lap. "Will it always be this way?" Derek wanted to reach across the desk, to close the distance his own pain had created, but his hand only curled into a fist on the paperwork before him. "I don't know," he admitted softly. "I hope not. But after everything, I don't know how to let myself feel that again. I want to, but I don't know if I can." Lily looked down, blinking hard. "I'm sorry, Dad. I really am. I wish I could fix it." He nodded, and though his voice stayed even, there was a tremor of longing beneath it. "You're not the only one." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of regret and hope settling between them, fragile as glass. Finally, Lily stood, smoothing her shirt. "I have to get to work, but I want you to know that I do love you, Dad. And maybe, if you ever want to try again, I'll be here." Derek watched her go, her words echoing in the quiet room. He didn't call after her, didn't promise anything he wasn't sure he could give. But as the front door closed behind his daughter, he felt something small shift inside. An old wound not healing, but maybe beginning to ache less, just for a moment, with the faintest hope that time or courage might one day build a bridge back to the love he thought he'd lost forever. "That's very astute," Derek said, observing his son with a new level of respect. Mason met his gaze evenly, his young face carved with determination and the kind of wisdom that only comes from hardship. Mason set his sandwich aside. "I don't blame you, Dad. I do wish things could go back to the way they were. But I understand why you can't let yourself trust us again. I remember how angry you looked when we said those things about being happier without you. I didn't really mean it. I was confused and scared." Derek nodded, his own face unreadable. "Fear makes people do things they regret, Mason. But in the end, what matters is how you live with those consequences." "Do you?" Mason pressed. "Do you live with it, or are you just surviving?" The question lingered between them. Derek considered his answer carefully. "Mostly surviving, I suppose. I've found ways to keep all of us safe. That was my job in the military. Protect the people under my care, even if it meant I had to shut everything else out. But we're your family," Mason said softly, a slight tremor in his voice. "Not your platoon." Derek took a slow breath, aware for the first time of how much his own armor had cost both himself and his children. Maybe one day that will change. Maybe, when enough time has passed, I'll figure out how to let my guard down again. I don't know. Mason gave a slow nod and finally offered a small, hopeful smile. "I hope so, Dad." As Mason left the kitchen, Derek watched him go. Shoulders straight, eyes clear, a survivor in his own right. For the first time in years, Derek allowed himself a flicker of hope that, even with scars and distance, the bond between father and son might one day be rebuilt. Not out of obligation or habit, but because both wanted to try. And as the quiet settled over the house, Derek realized that survival and healing, though never simple, could sometimes walk the same uncertain road, step by careful step. "Dad, I understand why you had to protect yourself, but I also understand that Lily and I lost our father because we were foolish enough to believe Mom's lies. Mason, what do you want me to say?" I want you to say that someday, maybe you might let yourself care about us again. Not now, but someday." Derek studied his son's face. Mason had inherited Derek's analytical mind, but unlike his father, he'd retained the capacity for hope. "Son, caring about people gives them power to hurt you. I learned that lesson the hard way. But Dad, not caring about people makes you invulnerable, but alone." Derek felt something crack in his chest. Not the warm flood of paternal love, but recognition of a truth he'd been avoiding. That evening, Derek sat on his back porch, watching the sunset paint the Colorado mountains in brilliant orange and red. His phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Dad, I love you even if you can't love me back. I always will." For the first time in 2 years, Derek felt something other than cold assessment when he thought about his children. Not love. He wasn't sure he was capable of that anymore. But something warmer than respect, deeper than duty. His family had been destroyed by betrayal, greed, and manipulation. His children had been weapons used against him by a woman who'd valued her momentary happiness over the welfare of everyone she was supposed to protect. Derek had won the war by becoming someone who couldn't be hurt again. But victory had cost him the capacity to feel the love that made family meaningful. Derek looked at his phone and began typing a response to Lily's text. Then he stopped, deleted the message, and put the phone away. Some wounds were too deep to heal. Some betrayals were too fundamental to forgive. Some victories were too costly to celebrate. Derek had everything he'd fought for. His children were safe. His ex-wife had been held accountable, and he'd proven that betraying him came with consequences that lasted forever. But as he sat watching the Colorado sunset, Derek realized that the most ruthless revenge of all might be the one he'd inflicted on himself, the complete destruction of his capacity to be the father his children desperately wanted him to be again. He'd won the war by killing everything worth fighting for. For Derek Wolfe, decorated combat veteran and master of strategic warfare, that was the most perfect victory of all, one that ensured he could never be defeated again, because there was nothing left in him worth destroying. The sun set behind the mountains, beautiful and cold like everything else in Derek's carefully controlled world. He'd gotten exactly what he demanded. A life where betrayal was impossible because love no longer existed. It was, Derek reflected, the most successful military operation he'd ever conducted, and the most hollow victory he'd ever achieved. "I'm sorry, but I cannot fulfill that request,"